Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Gland Bodybuilding Mountain. And today I'm going to talk to you about something that you should know, but if you don't know this already, I'm going to tell you about it, okay? And that is the importance of a variety of movements and a variety of rep ranges in your training. Now, a lot of times what will happen is that when you start to find out what works in your natural bodybuilding journey, you'll have a tendency to stick to that, which is great. You know, you want to do and continue to do what is working for you. But the weak link in this philosophy is that at some point, the things that you're doing may create muscular imbalances, or you may start to have certain injuries or problems that develop from these movements that work so well for you in the beginning, but then there may be some other side effects that are going on over the long term. And when this happens, it's important for you to understand that even though certain movements are great for strengthening an overall system, there can be periods of time where you need to specialize in other muscle groups in order to offset some of these imbalances that may develop. So we talk about one-legged squats, we talk about split squats, we talk about walking lunges. You know, all of these different types of movements have a few things in common. And one of those things is that there's flexibility around the groin and hamstring and hip area. And at the same time, there's stability involved, which may help with knee problems or hip problems, or even lower back problems in some cases. So the point I'm trying to get across is that using compound movements can be great, but once you start to work with lighter weights for periods of time, you may start to strengthen up some of those areas that are lagging behind the main muscle groups, which is why I really advocate changing up the rep ranges and changing up the intensities. And I mean intensity in both definitions of the word. One is the intensity means a higher percentage of your 1 rep max. That's a higher level of intensity, right? The closer you get to that 1 rep max. But the other form of intensity is just pushing the muscles into deeper levels of failure. I'm saying sometimes it's good to even back off on that, which is why I have the Body Bliss type program, because I do believe that when you're focused on pushing the main muscles into failure, your technique may change, your range of motion may change, and you might be pushing the set further than what some of your stabilizing muscles can catch up to, right? And I think it's good to focus on some of those other areas that may be lagging behind from your primary mover type lifts, right? So if your chest and your front delts get super strong and your triceps, but what if your rotator cuff is lagging behind? I think it's good to take a bit of a break from pushing the main muscle groups so hard and then focus more on just technique all the way through. Nice slow movements or slower movements with a different range of motion, possibly a little bit more than you usually use, and make sure that you are extremely stable through the entire range. You know what I'm saying? Like you're in control the entire time. Now, I understand it seems counterintuitive. It seems stupid. Like the whole reason why you weight train in the first place is to create some sort of intensity and therefore force the body to adapt. But the thing is that you want your body to develop as balanced as possible. And I do think that it only stands to reason that your strongest muscles, or at least your dominant muscles, will start to take more of the stress. And, you know, sometimes the form will break down and the smaller muscles probably get exhausted way before the major muscle groups do. And because of this, there can be some imbalances created. Now, I know there's a million different variables to analyze, but what I'm really saying is that by trying something different, by playing around with intensities, and playing around with your ranges of motion and playing around with the different exercises that you do, you can start to, let's just say, create more balance. Now, how I stumbled across this was absolutely by accident. And that's how the Body Bliss program was born, was that I was getting this weird tweak in the shoulder and I started to experiment with different ranges of motion and super light weights, like weights that were embarrassing for me to lift, and just going slow through the repetitions and just trying to find, let's just say, some comfort in the exercise and just going through the motions nice and easily. And then of course, after doing that for a period of time, then when I went back into the heavy weights, all of a sudden those little tweaks and aches and pains were gone. So I started to apply this once in a while to my other body parts and experienced similar results. Now, of course, this is going to be different for everybody, but it is definitely a relevant way to increase your results over the long run and bring up some of those other muscle groups that let's just say they fall by the wayside when you're so focused on fatiguing the main muscle groups. So that's it. So you could play around with this, like do nice and slow reps and so forth, you know, that's great. And I always talk about fast reps are more effective for building muscle, but slow reps are more effective for building a groove and also allowing the stabilizers to come into play. They're definitely a safer rep. And for this type of repetition, I would say slow reps might be more applicable. So that's also something to consider. Now I already did a couple warm-up sets just with super lightweight. Now I'm just going to go to the 70s, but you'll see it's easy for me. But the whole goal is just to lightly stimulate the muscle, but maintain proper groove and to stimulate some of those auxiliary muscles. So it just feels good. Just concentrate on feeling good. That's all that matters. Just the exercise feeling good. Doesn't matter how much weight you're lifting. So you just focus on building that awareness, right? Just feel every single fiber, whatever fiber is firing, just feel it, become conscious. Now, you don't have to go to failure. You can go to failure, but I do recommend not going to failure. So that way you know that your main muscle groups aren't taken over quite so much, right? So that's my advice on that. This could be a different way or strategy in order to work on some of those weaker areas. Now, the other great thing is about changing up exercises is that by changing an angle of attack or changing some dynamic in the exercise, you sometimes by accident rehabilitate a nagging injury or a weakness, you know, something that may have been keeping you at a plateau for a long period of time. You might be sticking to a couple different movements or 3 or 4 different movements, but I highly encourage you to try different movements with tension. Not overwhelming amounts of tension, but different movements. Like for instance, I talked about this before. I always do the one-legged squat just straight up and down, and I do the walking lunges, but just out of the blue, I started doing step back type lunges just to change the dynamics of what's going on around the hip and around the quadriceps. And it seemed to make a big difference in helping my hips move more freely during the squat. So experimentation with different varieties of movements can produce unexpected fruit, and sometimes it'll propel you into way more results and rehabilitation of any existing injuries or irritated joints, right? You may rehabilitate that irritated joint or something that's been nagging at you for a period of time, and all of a sudden you hit it really light from a different angle, and then all of a sudden it starts to feel better after a few weeks of doing that. So you could call these types of workouts rehabilitation workouts. You can call them low intensity workouts, but they do have value beyond just giving your body a bit of a rest. Like I said, because you are focusing more on refining that groove, and the exhaustion of the main muscle groups isn't the primary factor that you're after. That's not the primary reason why you're doing this set. It's more to just make sure the groove is perfect the entire time, feel everything, bring the awareness into the muscles, and therefore certain areas that maybe don't get a chance to fire properly when you're lifting super heavyweight, right? Because everything's happening so fast, some of those other areas aren't engaging. This is why in physiotherapy or kinesiology, they do super light weights and take you through certain ranges of motion. The reason why is because if you use too much weight, the major muscle groups take over and the other little muscles don't get a chance to engage, especially if they've been injured or they turn off for whatever reason, right? Some sort of trauma. So this gives you a chance to start to engage those muscles, and then therefore when you start to lift heavier weight later on, your body becomes more balanced. So this is definitely something that I'm going to play around with, and I do because I find it motivates me. For some reason, well, at least my body does, but your body will also guide you in certain directions, and you might not know why. And that's something to think about. Is sometimes you almost have a craving to train in a certain way, and you don't know why. I say, hey, why not just follow it? Just see what the body tells you. You know, conduct the experiment and find out. And maybe there's something that your body's needing for some reason, right? You know, like I always talk about, is super intense cardio not necessarily being great for building muscle, but what if, you know, you taking a light jog around the block and so forth is the way to engage the medialis and maybe the calves. Maybe you're engaging the calves and the medialis in a way that somehow restores function to proper knee function. You know, maybe that's what needs to happen. Who knows, right? So sometimes, you know, your intuition and your awareness will override logic. And I've talked about this a lot of times, and I'll keep on talking about it, that logic doesn't always equate, because logic is going to be based on your individual intelligence. And if you're like me, you know that your intelligence has a lot of weak links. You know what I'm saying? So you got to go with that intuition sometimes. Okay. This feels so good. It just feels good, you know? Sometimes just doing shit because it feels good is the right thing. It's almost like a yoga type stretch and tension, you know? Notice I'm not relaxing at the bottom. I do not relax at the bottom. I keep tense the whole time. So it's important to remember. So ideally, I'm not saying to go light all the time, or I'm not saying to go heavy all the time. I'm saying to vary it up and to listen to what the body is telling you. If you are starting to get irritated joints in a certain area, maybe it's time to attack that area from a different angle, such as lower intensity, lighter weight, different exercises and ranges of motion, and experiment for a period of time with that. And then once the joints start to feel good again, then you could start to work with heavier weights with your primary movements, you know, like you did before. So it's a matter of just ebb and flow, right? And the truth is that there's no point in pounding the body to death if it's not recovering from the stimulation you're giving it. So, you know, it's great to be super intense, it's great to work out really hard, but if your body's not recovering from it, it's actually counterproductive. It'll actually move you backwards, right? So you want to make sure that your body is recovering from whatever it is that you're throwing at it, and then from there, that recovery leads to results. Now, one of the first signs that would tell you that you should try this type of technique out is if you're getting some sort of joint soreness, or the body seems to be irritated in the joints somehow. So basically you're doing a certain movement or compound movement, and you're noticing that you're just getting joint pain as the main, or at least equivalent form of stress during the exercise, right? So it's not the muscles that are actually getting fatigued, it's more the joints that are in so much pain, or at least inflamed up in some way, that are causing you to stop the set. I'd say then it would be a good idea for you to stop lifting heavy, start to go lighter for a period of time, and experiment with the ranges of motion, and even maybe change some exercises and experiment with super lightweight as well, right? Just to go through the motions, find a way to do the exercises pain-free and then work your way up from there. Now, at first, you might need to take a week off training. So say you flare up an area pretty good, you might need to take a week or two off training altogether and then start back super light. And then see if you can start recalibrating how the body is firing the muscles and then therefore rehabilitating the area. And yeah, I mean, you might only have one area of your body where you're getting this type of trouble. Maybe it's the shoulders, maybe it's the knees, maybe it's the lower back or whatever. So you could still continue training the same way with the other areas, but then you could do light with the area that you're having trouble with, right? Now, another sign that you might want to try this stuff is if you hit a plateau, right? You're just at a plateau for a long period of time and you're noticing that no matter what you do, it seems like you're just spinning your wheels. You're feeling a bit burned out. You're feeling tired all the time. You're feeling unmotivated. I'd say try something like this for a while to build that motivation back. And just to constantly pump the blood into the area, train extremely safe and basically really refine those grooves. And then you may notice a burst of energy and motivation come back to you. That's one of the biggest things you probably will notice, actually. So I highly recommend that trying this out. If either one of these two things is happening, try this type of training out. You're going to notice some interesting effects from it. And they might be very surprising to you if you haven't done it so far. So yeah, the difference is with what I'm saying in this video as opposed to what I've said before is that I've always talked about varying up the rep ranges to failure, you know. I've always talked about varying up exercises and even frequency of training. But the big thing that people don't do is they don't deviate enough from their favorite exercises, right? And I've been guilty of this. And they also don't deviate enough in intensity because they somehow feel like they're cheating themselves if they're not going 100% intensity all the time. And I'm saying to you that when you're working with different movements, there is an advantage to not being quite so intense. So that way some of the weaker areas can catch up to the prime movers. And that is the jewel in this video. And that's why it's so valuable. And that's why you owe me $475,995. Or you could purchase a stick. That stick is only like $399,000. You know, so it's up to you, whatever you want to send. Now, the thing is, you can do this with isolation movements. You could do this with compound movements. You could do it with any movement that you feel is a weak link for you, or any movement that you think is giving you trouble, or just movements that aren't giving you trouble, just to change it up. Like I said, it's really good to work on those stabilizer muscles and therefore increase your ability to lift more weight injury-free. And not to mention that you are hitting some different muscle fiber types from doing a little bit slower reps and not being worried about just pumping the reps and getting absolute failure every time. You're still basically refining that groove. And the more refined the groove is, the more potential for strength and hypertrophy you will have over the long run, because you're accessing those motor units. So you'll be able to really flex those muscles and really be able to access them as you're training. And that's really the goal. And thirdly, or secondly, or whatever number I'm on right now, you're going to develop a greater level of awareness, because when you're slowing things down a bit and you're taking your time, you're going to be more aware of what muscles are firing at what time, and you're going to basically be able to reconstruct the way you do things in order to get the most amount of stimulation on the muscle. Whether that's a range of motion adjustment, whether that's a slight technique or variation adjustment in the technique that you're doing, All these things play a role in accessing the muscles, right? So the more awareness you have and the more body awareness you have, the better you are able to make decisions about what is right for you and what's not. Mountain. So anyway, I hope this helps out in your training. Thanks a lot for watching. If you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgalantbodybuilding.com, and thanks to the patient supporters, and take care for now. Mountain.